Today we're going to be working with a tool that I've been particularly hesitant about, and that's the makeup sponge. A lot of content creators promise great things about this thing, but I've really seen it as just a gimmick. What we're going to be using this for is a replacement for an airbrush. Comparative to an airbrush, these things are cheap, but I wouldn't say they're that cheap because you will have to replace them as you use them and they dry out. And to showcase this tool, we're going to be painting one of the hardest colors out there, white. And as you can see, I've primed this miniature in black, which is the complete opposite of white, and you might be thinking I'm crazy, but what better way to test this tool than to try the hardest thing out there? So let's grab a sponge and get painting. Alright, I'm a big liar. We're not going straight white on the black. We're actually going to start with 2 thin coats Wizard Gray, and we're going to be applying it over the entirety of the model. The reason for this is I want to have a nice gradient for my model. I don't want it to be pure white, so that gray is going to be a nice base coat for our white, as well as creating the lighting that we want for this model. As you can see, I'm just dabbing it on there, and it applies fairly well, although it doesn't get in all those nooks and crannies. This makes me thankful that I sub-assembled it so I can take some parts off and get in some of those more difficult areas to reach. And immediately I will say that is definitely one of the weaknesses of this makeup sponge. It can't reach a lot of those harder to reach areas if you're trying to go for a full coat. So the airbrush definitely has that advantage over this product. The first time I actually tried a sponge, it was on a Space Marine, and the sponge couldn't reach into their chest where their bolt gun was covering. So immediately I was like, oh, this is just trash. I'm not even going to bother with this. But there might be some smaller sponges out there that will get through that issue. Alright, once that's finished, I dried up my makeup sponge, and now we're going to be applying our next color, which is AK 3rd Gen Sky Gray. When you're painting white, you want to think about values. That's why you're never actually going to paint pure white, except for the brightest highlights of the miniature. The reason for that is we want to build contrast, which you can't obtain if your brightest color is all over the miniature. You only want that brightest to be hitting specific points. That'll make the entire model more interesting. And that's why I'm going to leave some of the areas that gray color just to have that contrast and that values that we want. And I will say that the sponge does apply gradients pretty well in a nicely blended way. And at this point, I'm done with the sponge, but as we take a look at our miniature, and there's some areas that look really good, you can see some of these areas that the black primer is showing through because the sponge couldn't reach it. Some of these areas might be okay to leave darker, but we don't want it pure black. It's very similar to pure white where it should be extremely rare. We'll clean it up soon. At this point, we're going to start blocking in the blacks. Tallgeese is a very black and white miniature, so I want to get some of that black color in there, just so I can see the white a little bit more clearly as we move to work on it. And for this, we're going to base coat with 2 thin coats Death Reaper. I'm basing the color scheme for my miniature off of the TV version of the Tallgeese and not the Endless Waltz one, so there's not going to be a lot of yellow like that real grade Gunpla has. Now to clean up those areas where that sponge failed us, we're just going to be taking our Wizard Gray and glazing it in there to smooth out that blend. Death Reaper isn't pure black, so we're going to get some black wash in there to get some shading in the crevices. Once that's all dry, we're going to be taking that Death Reaper and mixing it with 2 thin coats Dungeon Stone Gray, and we're going to begin to highlight these black areas. Then we can take some pure Dungeon Stone Gray and do our edge highlights for that black. Don't go overboard because then you'll turn that black color gray. Just be precise and make some thin lines. Alright, with the black done, we're going to be moving back to our white armor, and we're going to be using AK 3rd Gen Sky Gray, and we're going to be applying it with a brush. Now, as you can see, as we apply this, it's going to be a lot brighter and more saturated than when we applied it with a sponge. This is good. And the reason that this is good is because it allows us to create those values that I talked about earlier much easier. When you're working on value, you want to think about where your light is coming from. On this model, the lower leg is more gray, and as I get towards the upper thigh, which is closer to the chest, which is the focal point of the model, I'm brightening it up, so I'm adding value. And you might think that that gray leg will look funny, but it won't. It will look like it's shadowed by this giant mecha blocking the sun from above it. And as you work on this brush layer of sky gray, you're really going to see the Tallgeese transform into that perfect white color that you see in the TV show. It's really such a good color for this miniature. Once you're done with the sky gray, and it's going to take a lot of work on that sky gray, you can move into your next highlight, which will be pure white mixed with that sky gray. And as we approach that pure white territory, we want to make sure that we're not applying a lot of it. You want your lines to be thin and controlled and not overbearing. And after that, you can finish the white off with some pure white dot highlights on the corners of those edges. We're going to go through the accent colors really quickly here, starting with our base coat of red with Two Thin Coat's Red Rage. Followed by Citadel's Mephiston Red. And then Citadel's Evil Sun Scarlet. And Citadel's Wild Rider Red, and this is a bit more of an orange color, so you're just going to be doing some thin edge highlights with it. And you can finish it off with some dot highlights of Two Thin Coat's Orange Flare. For the yellow, and I think I might have found my new favorite yellow base color, we're going to be using Two Thin Coat's Manticore Ochre. Be careful not to get any of it on your white, it'll be a pain in the butt to clean it up. And if you're feeling adventurous, you can look up the Endless Waltz color scheme and add some yellow trim to other parts of the model to make it look a little bit more fancy. We're going to follow that up with Two Thin Coat's Skulker Yellow, and we're not going to be applying that over the entirety of the icon. You're going to layer it as well as do some micro stipplings to create some cool texture towards the top left-hand side of that insignia, or wherever your light is going, and leaving wherever your light is not darker, which is once again all about those values. Then we can finish it off with some yellow flame from Two Thin Coats just along the edges as an edge highlight. You can do some dot highlights of ice yellow if you'd like. I did not. It's up to preference. And here you have the Tallgeese completed, and I want to start off with what we had spoken about in the beginning of the video, which was the sponges. Now, my take on the sponges is that it is not a gimmick. I thought it was a gimmick, but it turns out it's a pretty useful tool, although limited. And every tool has its limits, which is why we have a lot of different tools in our toolbox. So the sponge is something I will use in the future, but probably not too often. But I think it's a great starting point for a lot of beginning painters who want to get into using some different techniques to build those blends and layers. I can also see a lot of potential in the tool for the speed painting side of the hobby. I did get that white on there pretty darn fast. So here's the Tallgeese. I know I made it a little bit more about those sponges rather than the machine itself, but I know a lot of you are excited about this, and I thought it was a great way to showcase that tool. Like, subscribe. Do you love sponges? Do you hate sponges? Leave that in the comment below. Let me know what you think, and I will catch you in the next one.